Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Now we are going to the third chapter, eighth Brahmana. There are two Gargi Brahmanams here. This is the eighth one, which is supposed to be more important. Now the third chapter is a long dialogue between a number of great sages on the one hand and Yajnavalkya on the other. Ashwala, Artabhaga, Bhujyu, Ushasta, Kahola, Gargi, Vidatta. These are the sages. In the eighth Brahmanam of the third chapter, Gargi returns. She had already appeared in the sixth Brahmanam, but now again she comes. And she continues her dialogue with Yajnavalkya. Ataha Vanjitnavi Uvacha Brahmana Bhagavantu Handahamimam Dau Prasno Prakshami Tau Ched Me Vakshati Navai Jadu Yushmakam Imam Kachit Brahmodyam Jeta Iti Pritcha Gargi. So Gargi comes to the court of Janaka and she addresses the great Pandits, great scholars who are assembled there, including Yajnavalkya. Look here, learned men. She tells the sages, I am going to ask Yajnavalkya two important questions. Now, if he is able to answer these questions, then be sure you can never defeat him in a debate, in a dialogue. This is a kind of dialogue between a number of saints and sages on the one hand, including Gargi, and Yajnavalkya on the other. They are putting questions to Yajnavalkya. So Gargi says, I am going to put two very important questions. And be sure that none of you will be able to confront him in a debate if he is able to answer these questions. So other Pandits, Brahmanas, they all right, go ahead Gargi. Yajnavalkya also gave his permission. Now Gargi begins her dialogue. Sa hovaja aham vaitva Yajnavalkya yada kasyo va vaideho va ugrabutro ujjam dhanuradityam kutva do banavanto Supatnadi vyadhino haste kutva upadishtet evamevakam tva dvabhyam prasnabhyam upodastham tau ume bruhidi pritchagargi. So, Bruhi, I am going to tell you. So, Yajnavalkya said, Pritchagargi, all right, go ahead. Yajnavalkya said, look here, I am going to ask you two questions. And she has got a very high opinion about how formidable she is. So she describes what a terrible question she is going to ask. So you will find it here. Now there were some great famous soldiers in those days. The king of Kashi, the king of Videha, the famous soldiers, maybe knights, emperors who are famous for their military prowess. They are well-known archers. They have put arrows on their bows and they are aiming their arrows at their enemies. Very sharp arrows. Similarly, I am standing in front of you with two sharp arrows. These two terrible questions. Now you answer me. This is Gargi's statement. And Yajnavalkya said, all right, you ask. Now she asked the question. Sa hovaja yadurdham Yajnavalkya divag yadavak prithivyaha yadantara dyava prithivi ime yadbhudam cha bhavacha bhavishya chetya chakshati kasmin stadodam cha prodam chetya. It's a beginning. Now, what is that reality which is beyond the heavens and below the earth and in between? And it is called past, present and future. Where is that sutram, it is called? Where is that reality built? Where does it exist? Now, remember, she continues this as a very long chapter, and we don't have time to go through all those details. Now we are concerned with Yajnavalkya's answer. So Yajnavalkya gives his answer. He gives through different stages. First he says, there is this sutra, Hiranyagarbha Sutra, the cosmic energy. Then there is that the monotheistic creator God who understands, who decides to create all this. And beyond that there is the absolute impersonal principle called Atman. Now you have to remember a few things here, because otherwise we will have a lot of missing links. So I want to fill up those gaps because it's a long chapter, very long chapter. In Vedantic tradition, we evolve in our spiritual life, and as we evolve, our understanding of the absolute reality also evolves. So there are 5 levels of evolution of the absolute reality of Godhead in Vedic literature in general. Pantheism, Panitheism, Polytheism, Monotheism, Henotheism and Monism. There are 6 stages. At one stage we equate this wonderful nature, the empirical universe, with God. It's called Pantheism. If you are getting information, those of you who have read Emerson's books, you find Emerson was more or less a pantheist. So, of course, there is also an element of Pantheism. Pantheism equates the empirical universe with God. In Pantheism, you conceive of an inherent reality behind this empirical universe. So it goes a little deeper. So, and then there is called polytheism. In polytheism, you conceive of a God principle behind these individual natural phenomena. There is a divine principle that functions, that operates, that's behind the function of the various natural phenomena. And in monotheism, you think of a creator God, a supreme God principle, a God with name and form and attributes, who is the presiding deity of the different other deities, other gods and goddesses. And in monism, you still go beyond, you conceive of the absolute reality as one immanent, impersonal principle that is present in everything and that is present everywhere. Now, at the highest level, this Brahman, at the highest absolutistic level, this Brahman is sometimes described as Aksharam. Aksharam is that absolute principle, Brahman or Atman, which is present in everything, which is also omnipresent. So as I said in the earlier class, the highest metaphysical discussion takes place in various Upanishads with slight differences. Various methods and various imageries and illustrations are used, sometimes parables are used in various Upanishads. There is one problem with the Vedantic tradition. In Vedantic tradition, you'll be surprised, this Vedantic tradition was preserved not by academic philosophers, but by great traditional scholars who studied this for 30 years, 40 years, doing nothing else, mind you. If you study architecture, engineering, medicine, little homeopathy, Hatha Yoga, also little Vedanta, you may study little Vedanta, but only little of Vedanta. That's all. This great tradition, you'll be surprised to know, you should know a little bit of Indian history. In all these thousands of years, these traditions were preserved through oral tradition by different sages and saints. And there are different gotras, different lineages of these saints who lived in different parts of India. And they used different imageries and different illustrations to teach these Vedantic principles. So sometimes there will be some complexities that you will understand only when you study from a traditional scholar. Because in the universities, there is not enough scope to go through all these complexities, all these intricacies. University education is a matter of a few years when you focus on certain things with an intention of writing a thesis, and there is a matter. But in traditional learning, they start when they are 5 years, 6 years, and continue for at least 25, 30 years. So practically it's a matter of giving one's whole life to this kind of learning. So you find different prakriyas, different methodologies, different schools of philosophical discussions and dialogues used. So here this is special, is a new approach called Akshara. In this context, Brahman is described as Akshara. In another Brahman is called Andaryami Brahmana, it's called the 7th chapter, it's called Andaryami Brahmana, where Atman is described as the indweller in everything. To give an example, I can give one example. In the 7th Brahmana of the same chapter, 3rd chapter, there's a dialogue, of course, not Gargi, but another great sage in Yajnavalkya. Now, Yajnavalkya described the same reality. Ye prithiviyam tishtan, prithiviyam antaraha, yem prithivina veda, yasya prithvi shariram, ye prithivim antaro yamayedi, eshata atma antaryami amrtaha. Then the final conclusion is this. This reality, the God whom you are seeking, the Brahman that you are seeking, it is within your own heart. It is indweller, the indweller within yourself. Now to explain this, Yajnavalkya, look at these mantras. Yajnavalkya uses some illustrations. Ye prithiviyam tishtan. This antaryami, this indweller, this consciousness, this Atman, this immanent principle, it is existing on this earth. If you tell somebody God exists on earth, they mean these mountains, valleys, the pine trees, all these are gods and goddesses. So to refute, to deny that misinterpretation, the Upanishad says, Prithivya Antara. This Atman, this indweller, this immanent principle, it exists on earth, but it exists within the earth. So you can't say these trees and mountains and valleys are Atman. No. So it exists within. In that case you may say, well, the gold mine, gold, iron ore, bauxite, all exist within earth. Iron ore, coal, everything. So God and goddesses. To deny that possibility, the Upanishad says, Ye Prithvina Veda, but the earth doesn't know of this. It is not part of earth. Yasya Prithvi Shariram. This earth is only a vehicle, an instrument through which that Atman manifests. Now you cannot say God is a tree and mountain, or that is iron or gold or. So the Upanishad says, Ye Prithiviyam Tishtan, it exists on earth, it is everywhere. But then Ye Prithiviyam Antaraka, it is within earth. Yen Prithvi Navedya, but earth doesn't know it. Then Yasya Prithvi Shariram. Of that Atman, this earth is only a body, a vehicle, an instrument for his expression. It exists within this earth, within everything. So existing within as the immanent principle, Antaryami, the immanent principle, the indweller principle, in everything it controls, regulates the whole entire creation. And remember, this Atman is within you. So, like that, the Upanishad continues in the same illustration continues till 23rd verse. This is only third verse. For 19-20 verses, this continues. Absurdistan, this Atman exists in earth, it's in water, but it exists within water. Water principle is only an instrument for his expression. It exists in fire. Fire doesn't know it. Fire is only an expression of this Atman. Antariksha Dishtan. It exists in Antariksha. I mean the middle region. It exists in air. Yo Vayo Dishtan Vayo Antarahayam Vayu Naveda Yasava. Yasi Vayu Shariram Yo Vayu Antaro Yamedi. Like that, in Dividishtan, like that, the verses continue. Final act, what happens? The Upanishad takes up all possible entities that you can conceive of at the empirical plane, at the gross plane, and tells you this Atman exists within all these things, but of this Atman, the entire empirical creation is only an expression, a vehicle for its manifestation. This is the principle. I am just giving an example of another line of description of the same principle. Now coming back to Gargi Brahmanam, Yajnavalkya continues in the 3rd chapter, 8th Brahmanam, 9th verse. Before this, there is another aspect that Yajnavalkya makes clear. You know, Gargi asked a question on a subject which is really beyond description, beyond explanation. Because this Akshara Brahman is the absolute spiritual reality which is beyond description. If you describe anything, then it cannot be infinite. If, suppose you are going to give I am going to give you a complete description of God, then God becomes so small that you can describe Him. So, what is within words, within definition, within the framework of definition or description or explanation is limited. The unlimited, the infinite is always beyond description, beyond words, beyond any kind of answer. See, Gargi knows that. Gargi knows that she has asked a question, the answer to which cannot be really given in words. So if Yajnavalkya immediately starts giving a long exposition of this Akshara Brahman, it means Yajnavalkya doesn't know that it is beyond description. Somebody tells you I am going to give you a complete length and weight and height of God. God is 10 feet, 300 pounds. Then you can be sure that fellow may know everything except God. So, let's call It's called Vipratipatti dosha. So, Vipratipatti dosha means Yajnavalkya doesn't even know that God is beyond description. That's why he is going about giving a detailed description in answer to this question. But suppose Yajnavalkya says, well, I don't know, because then it is all Apratipatti dosha. Means Yajnavalkya will make himself a fool in the huge assembly of great learned pandits and philosophers, including Gargi. Certainly not a very great compliment for a man like Yajnavalkya. But Yajnavalkya was too shrewd to be trapped by Gargi. So what Yajnavalkya says is, Sahovaja edadvaita daksharam Gargi brahmana abhivadanti. Yajnavalkya doesn't say, I am going to give you a detailed explanation of this akshara. He says, learned men talk like this. So, Yajnavalkya cannot be blamed as a person who is going about giving a long description of the absolute, indescribable, non-definable reality. At the same time, Yajnavalkya will not admit that I don't know answer to this. In that case, Apratipatti means ignorance. Other than Pratipatti, Yajnavalkya doesn't know the reality, that this reality is beyond description. That's why he is trying to describe. Yajnavalkya gives complete answer, but he says, it's not my view. Some learned men talk like this. And he gives a long description. So Gargi understood. She had met somebody who is more than her match. So, Sahovaja edadvaita daksharam Gargi brahmana abhivadanti. Learned men, sages and saints, who are learned, who experienced all this, they say that this aksharam is asthulam, it is not gross. It is not subtle. It akraswam, it is not short. Adirgham, it is not long. And then it is alohidam, it is not red. Asneham, it is not greasy. Achayam, it is not a shadow. Atama, it is not darkness. Avayu, it is not air. Anakasam, it is not akas, it is not the infinite sky. Asangam, it has no attachment, it is totally detached. Arasam, it has no rasa, no taste. Agandham, it has no smell. Ajatushkam means it has no eyes. Asrotram, it has no ears. Avak, it has no vagindriya, means the sense of speech. Amanaka, it has no mind. Atejaskam, it is not in the nature of prakasha, it is not just light. Apranam, it is not prana. Like that, all possible descriptions are denied in Yajnavalkya's definition. This particular method of describing the absolute reality is called Nishedha Mukhalakshana Vakya. Means, you try to explain the absolute reality by disconnecting its connection with anything that's normally known. So, if you tell somebody, well, don't worry about God, don't worry about Brahman, he cannot be described. It won't make any sense. Because already we have our own understanding of many things based on our own evolution. So we sometimes believe God is one who creates this world, who sustains. God is kind. That's fine. But one problem, if you say, well, now I have given you a complete description of God. God is who creates this world. He's compassionate. That's all, nothing more. That means God becomes so small that you can put him within the framework of a few words. So to deny that possibility, to emphasize the non-definable, the indescribable, the inexplicable nature of the absolute reality, all possible attributes and descriptions and qualifications are denied. So this should be understood. There's a very interesting method in the Upanishads. That's one method of describing the absolute reality. Either you have to say Brahman is everything. Brahman is everywhere, omnipresent, immanent, transcendental. Or you have to say this absolute reality is not these tangible things of a few days or a few moments. This absolute reality is not like this mic did not exist before somebody manufactured this mic system, public address system, because it did not exist 100 years back. It must have been in the form of an iron ore on earth. Maybe after 100 years it won't exist. So what does it mean? It exists only for 100 years. But then these things which exist, which come into existence in the past, exist for some time, as earth may exist for millions of years. An insect may be for a few minutes or seconds. They are within the framework of time, space and causation. So to deny or to emphasize the point that the absolute reality is beyond definition, beyond limitation, beyond anything that is finite. Yajnavalkya denies all possible limitations in the absolute reality. That's all. Now the discussion will continue. And then, natadasnadi kinchana, natadasnadi. That Atman doesn't eat anything, that is a literal translation. What do you mean? No. Atman doesn't eat food, but you are able to eat food because Atman is immanent present in you. That's the idea. Atman doesn't walk, doesn't drive a car, but you are able to drive the car because this consciousness, this Atman, this indweller spiritual principle is present in us. That's why we are able to think, we are able to meditate, we are able to look beyond the empirical, beyond the finite things of this world. That's the idea behind it. And then Yajnavalkya gives another example. Edasiva aksharasya prasasane gargi surya chandramaso vidrudau tishtha. There's a very, very interesting description in the Upanishads. Yajnavalkya says, because of this aksharam, this Atman, this Brahman, everything in this world exists. If you look at the skies, the mountains, the sun, the moon, the galaxy, the Milky Way, the stars, everything, you can see behind this phenomena an inherent rhythm, a sequence, a harmony. See, look at the whole universe. The planets have their own gravitational pull. So if you analyze the whole universe, you can see an inner unifying, harmonizing, synthesizing, connecting thread, a principle behind the apparent chaos. A skeptic may look around and see nothing behind this. Everything is different from everything else. Everything is disconnected. But from a spiritual point of view, from a metaphysical point of view, you see an inherent unifying thread that is an invisible harmonizing principle behind the whole creation. In Vedic language, in Rigveda, it is called a rhythm. There are 3 terms that you find in the Rigvedic Samhita. Rhythm, Satyam and Dharma. 3 principles you find. The commentators, Sayana, Mahidhara and other commentators, Veda, Bhashyas, they have given detailed description of this phenomenon. So one is Satyam. Satyam is the philosophical metaphysical principle that preserves the entire existence. Satyam is the absolute, eternal, philosophical principle. Or Satyam is the word used to call that dimension of the absolute reality, which functions as the absolute metaphysical, spiritual principle. Rhythm is that harmonizing, synthesizing, unifying principle behind the whole cosmic existence. See, for example, if you cut down the trees, you are inviting a kind of ecological imbalance in nature. You do any act of violence against the ecological, the empirical, anything, it always creates some repercussion, not always positive. And dharma is applying ethical principle. The same reality, when it is in its philosophical, metaphysical dimension, is called satyam, the absolute truth. In its ethical dimension, is called dharma. Dharma here means that dhariti iti dharma. Dhrudhava means that which preserves, that maintains the entire cosmic existence. And rhythm is that what we call rhythm, R-H-Y-T-H, that there's a sequence, there's a harmonious sequence in seasons, in time, in different natural phenomena. That's what Yajnavalkya is referring to here. Edasya vakshirasya prashasane gargi surya chandramaso vidrudo tishthadah. A real philosopher can look at the sky and the sun and moon, the entire natural phenomena, and can see, well, all these things function according to certain predetermined harmonious principles, which shows there is a higher intelligence behind this apparent chaos. So, Yajnavalkya says, Edasya vakshirasya prashasane gargi. This akshara is antaryami, the immanent principle, dominant present reality. Because of its precedent, because of that reality, the sun and the moon, they are kept in their respective positions. And again, Edasya vakshirasya prashasane gargi, Dhyava prithivyo vidade tishthadah. So also, the earth and the celestial regions, they all exist because this higher spiritual principle is within, as the antaryami. As I said, maybe if you travel along the road of physics, one day we may reach this goal. But we should be able to see a connecting thread. If you take every bit of sand from the ocean and try to count, thinking that each sand grain is different from each other sand grain, there will be no end to anything. But if one can think of what could be the common connecting principle behind entire cosmic existence, one day perhaps scientists may agree with Yajnavalkya. Edasya vakshirasya prashasane gargi dhyava prithivyo vidade tishthadah. Edasya vakshirasya prashasane gargi nimesha muhurta ahoratrani arthamasa masa ridava samvatsaraha idi vidadaha tishthanti. Then Yajnavalkya says, because of this akshara, this Brahman, different time units like years, months, seasons, fortnights, Arthamasa means, days and nights, all these are existing because of this higher principle, which presides over all this. So, because of this higher principle, everything moves according to certain harmonious sequence and principles. Edasya vakshirasya prashasane gargi prachyu anya natyasyantanti svedebhya parvadebhya pradechyu anya yam chadisham anu edasya vakshirasya prashasane gargi Tatato Manishya Prasamsanti Yajamanam Deva Dirvim Pitru Anvayartah. So Yajnavalkya continues. Rivers flow in different directions from the mountains. People give gift. Here for Yajnavalkya is striking a very important point which we can understand today. People who are very rich, fabulously rich, and have made money not through proper means perhaps in many cases. When they reach a particular stage of affluence, they feel like giving away a few billions of dollars, starting a foundation, millions of dollars, because they have some prick of the conscience, something they want to do. Suddenly they think, well, this money is not going to last long because every day we see human beings dying and they don't take the huge wealth along with them. So what is going to happen to me? What am I going to do when I die? Because all the big bank balance won't accompany me. The checkbooks won't accompany me. So what is there after death? Immediately they start giving away, starting a foundation, giving away charities, helping the Ebola victims in Africa or AIDS victims and earthquake victims and so on. Now what is the real cause of this? They feel that by doing this, they are making a spiritual deposit. They are making a deposit, not in terms of money, but in terms of good actions and results, which will benefit them sometime, somewhere after their death. So in many cases, this is what is happening. So Yajnavalkya says, this guiding cosmic principle, it's called the absolute reality, the Atman. It is not visible. So you can't feel its presence if you look at human life just as a journey from cradle to grave. But if you look beyond the grave, there is something that is invisible now, which is going to exist even after death. And when you do a good deed, a meritorious deed, that's why it is called Edassivakshara Prasasana Dadato Manishyaga Prasamsanti. If you give donation, if you give gift, if you give charities, people praise you, they recognize you, they appreciate you because you are doing something good for the good of others. If there is no God, then what is the foundation of ethics and morality in this world? It's an absolute question that arises. Swami Vivekananda addresses this problem, maybe in practical Vedanta. The infinite oneness of the soul is the eternal sanction of all morality, all ethics, and all good actions. There is one immanent, omnipresent reality present in everything, everywhere. And that will convince us that the whole humanity is one spiritual family. We cannot hurt anyone without hurting ourselves. We cannot do harm to another person without eventually harming ourselves, because we and others are one. So this idea of unity and oneness of creation, of humanity, the idea the whole human family is one, is the ethical foundation of this same spiritual philosophy. So, for those of us who can look at nature, nature will teach us that there is something beyond itself. There is a higher intelligent principle, which is not visible, but very obvious for the thinking person. That there is something, there is higher reality, an immanent reality, in whose presence the entire cosmic life moves according to certain well-regulated principles and ideas. Otherwise, we may stumble upon accidentalism or naturalism or predeterminism. Either maybe. Maybe scientists will tell you, we don't have to look for a cause or for a higher intelligent principle behind. Scientists may tell you. Because it's nature. Well, if you ask the question, why should it be its nature? Why can't nature be something different? There is no answer. So those who believe in Vedanta will tell you there is an inherent principle which brings about a harmony, a sequence, a symphony behind all this apparently chaotic phenomenon. In fact, this is the beginning of human search for God. But the problem is, if you think God creates this world in a particular day, in a particular time, and said you should do this, otherwise I shall punish you. If you don't do this, I shall punish you. Or if you do this, I will send you to heaven. Then only the scientists will start revolting. That's the main problem. So here Yajnavalkya becomes very rational. That's the uniqueness, the scientific aspect of Vedanta. Vedanta takes you from effect to cause. Vedanta doesn't begin discussion with the cause itself. God one day sat on a throne and created this world. That's Vedanta doesn't say. Vedanta looks at creation as you find them around you when you open your eyes. You see all these mountains and valleys, sun and moon, time, unique seasons, years. You find Yajnavalkya refers to all this. Etas Shivaksharasya Prashasane Gargi Surya Chandramaso Vidudo Tishtadaha Dyava Prathivyu Vidudai Tishtadaha, and so on. The earth, the celestial regions, and the sun, the moon, all these show, they point to one higher supreme principle. So from effect to cause, that is the rational inquiry Vedanta. If you look around and see so much of harmony, so of course if you have to look beneath and beyond the apparent chaos, if you look at the surface, then everything is detached from everything else. There is no sequence, no harmony. You don't see any intelligent principle. If you see, there are so many problems in the world. If God is so good and kind, why can't He create a very wonderful world where everyone gets food, drinks, the social security, Medicare, insurance, everything? Why should there be homeless people? Why should there be war? Why should there be violence in human minds, human actions? Why should there be undesirable things? If you think of God who sits somewhere and creates His world, then you have to ask all these questions. But if, on the other hand, if you start to inquiry from effect to cause and trace it, and you start tracing from effect to cause for a fundamental principle, then you can see one cosmic, inherent, spiritual principle existing. That's what Yajnavalkya calls Edas Shivaksharasya Prashasana Gargi, etc. So, then Yajnavalkya continues his discussion. And he says, this Brahman, this Atman cannot be seen, but it is a seer. It is drashta, but it is not drishyam. It cannot be heard, but is the one who hears everything. It cannot be thought about, but is the one that thinks about everything. It cannot be known, but is the knower of everything. So what does it mean? Whatever you see with your eyes is relative. Whatever you see, whatever you hear about with your ears is limited. Whatever you can think of is limited by your thought. Whatever you can fully understand, cognize, is limited by your intellect. But this Atma is infinite. Therefore, it is the seer, it is the hearer, it is the thinker, the knower. It is not the seen, not the heard, not the thought. That's why he says, Tadva eda daksharam gargi adashtam dashtra asudam sotra amadam mantra avijñatam vijñatra na anyadadosti drishta. Means there is no other seer, Nyatadosti Srotra, Nanyatadosti Mantra. There is no other thinker. We are able to think because this Atman is present. We are able to hear because this Atman is present in us. Because it is the immanent principle which is within all of us. It is also the omnipresent principle. So, Yajnavalkya continues this discussion. One of the most glorious dialogues in the Upanishad literature. So, within a very, very short time, just very, very limited, inadequate, which is a very long chapter. Third chapter is very long, and this Brahmanam is also very important, quite long. So, I just try to give you a very, very superficial understanding. Shankaracharya's commentaries on these Brahmanams are very celebrated, highly metaphysical, which we don't have time right now to refer to. So thank you. Now you can have some interaction and discussions now. Yes, you want to ask?
Yes. From your beautiful background information on these philosophical dialogues, it almost seems as though they're the core of a method of discernment in the Vedanta. For example, going from the gross to the subtle, what we would call vichara. And also, this process, it is not this, a method of meditation. For example, what Ramana Maharshi used when his methodology of asking the three questions, going the three stages, Koham, who am I? Soham, I am he. And Naham, I am not anything perceptible. Can you talk a little bit about how these dialogues may have inspired the spiritual practices within the Vedanta? Or was it the other way?
Yeah. No. Whatever Ramana Maharshi taught has come from the Upanishads. There is nothing in his teaching which is not from the Upanishads. When you read Ramana Maharshi, you have to remember, Ramana Maharshi approaches the topic from the top, from the conclusion. In the Upanishads, you find the whole methodology is given. So when Ramana Maharshi asks the question, who am I? Know myself, know yourself. This, once you approach the subject from the conclusion point of view, then there is no scope for this kind of discussion. Here Yajnavalkya says, look at the mountains, skies and valleys, look at the seasons, time, sun and moon. There is an inherent regulated principle according to which they function, exist. Don't you see there should be a higher spiritual principle behind the function of these cosmic phenomena? So, Yajnavalkya takes you from effect to cause, as you call it, from gross to subtle. Subtle is the cause, gross the effect. Look at the earth, look at the sky, look at the natural phenomena, and you turn your inquiry inward. You find that this nature itself can teach you what lies beyond nature. Ramana Maharshi, on the other hand, he starts the inquiry from the top. Know yourself. Know ourselves. What is knowledge? Who am I? Or who are you, depending upon the context. Once we know our true nature, then everything becomes known. So, Ramana Maharshi he must have practiced a lot of yoga and meditation in previous lives. In the next life, he had already acquired much of this knowledge. And he started there. But Yajnavalkya method is different. Ramana Maharshi doesn't refer to the effects or the gross. He starts from the conclusion. But Shankaracharya, when he wrote these commentaries, he was like a big ship where he had to take all kinds of passengers, ticketless passengers also, the beginners also, first class, business class passengers also. So he had to take across the sky. Ramana Maharshi, on the other hand, who was a boat, which, spiritual seekers belonging to a particular trend of thought, Ramana Maharshi took them across. But these Upanishads like a big ships. So that's why, if you read the Upanishads, you find the genesis of bhakti, genesis of yoga, everything you find in the Upanishads. So, Ramana Maharshi took this conclusion aspect of the Upanishad philosophy. And he evolved his method of teaching. And it was appealing to a great many intellectuals. That was his method. You find many great spiritual teachers who come from time to time. They have their own approaches, their own methods. Different saints and sages who came from time to time. They have different approaches. But the great traditional teachers, acharyas, they on the other hand, they have to take the whole humanity into consideration. That's why Shankaracharya wrote the most beautiful, sublime devotional poetry for devotees. He also developed the puja tradition, puja method, that is also his creation. He also renovated hundreds of temples all over India. And he wrote the most sublime philosophical commentaries. He had to do so much. See, look at Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna. All bhakti, jnana, they all can be accommodated there. So here Yajnavalkya's method is distinct. Means first of all, he says, this aksharam, this antaryami, is an inherent principle within us. It is also the inherent principle behind the entire cosmic existence. As the inherent principle behind the entire cosmic existence, it regulates, it harmonizes the whole phenomena of existence and also life. Existence and also life. That's the idea. That's why two examples are given. Surya Chandramasu Dyava Prithivyo means sun and moon, earth and celestial regions, they all exist because Edas Siva Akshara Prasasane Gargi, because of this Akshara Brahman. Then he also says, those who give donations, you see, Edas Siva Akshara Prasasane Gargi Dadado Manushyaha Prashamsanti. See, for example, see, the same, because of the same Aksharam, see, people praise those who do charity, good things to others. So, existence and also functions of day-to-day functions of human beings, both are founded on the existence, on the presidentship, the presiding deity, presiding principle of this action. That's the comprehensiveness of this. Anything?
Yeah, when sometime I go teach at the Dialog University in Waco, Texas.
Teaching yoga?
No, the philosophy. So yoga teaching is different, but they have a world religion classes, and they sometimes invite the people from different religious scholars to come speak. But during that time, it was puzzling that even today's days and age, at Dialog University, they will still teach, instead of evolution, creation. And when I was researching, because I read my first Bible when I was in a 5th grade, and when I was reading the Old Testament, God created this first day, God created this second day, it was kind of puzzling. Coming to America, I started realizing that certain part of Christianity and majority parts of Muslim religion, they did not evolve with the time. Now, when you are mentioning that Vedas are over 8,000 years old,
and you can say the same thing about Hindus also.
okay,
They are, all of them are not evolved according to time. There are apparently unscientific, irrational belief systems among all communities.
So my question,
Remember, all are not Vedantins.
so my question
Okay. If you read Eckhart, Meister Eckhart, you find many of his statements are almost like, I have not read, I don't know Old German. I have to depend upon Rudolf Otto's translation of interpretation of Eckhartian philosophy. But I tell you, you should know that if you read Eckhart, you will find many of his statements are almost like repetitions or translations maybe into Old German of Shankaracharya's statements, the Bhashyas. No. I'm talking Meister Eckhart, the great Christian theologian philosopher who lived in 13th century. You should read all these. Without reading, we should not make statements that non-Hindu. My point, I want you to understand, there are very many great theologians. Not many, of course. Many of them were persecuted. Eckhart is a grand example. He was so Advaitic in his concepts, in his ideas. And many of his, he says, for example, God, he speaks of the Godhead, which goes beyond the Trinity. The Godhead, Supreme Godhead, is beyond description, beyond words. If anybody says he has understood the Supreme Godhead, he's wrong. So he also believes in the idea of becoming what he called Tada, complete identification with the absolute reality. So there are many great thinkers. I am familiar with the Christian theological, mystical tradition, but not the Islamic, so I don't know much about it. So there are many such great theologians, thinkers, not all of them, of course, who are very rational, very scientific, and very close to Advaita in the philosophical concepts. Come, please.
My question is that Vedas existed long time ago. So did Shankaracharya, did he made it the evolutions within it, or did he, according to the time and place, he reinterpreted that? How do you see that?
Shankaracharya interpreted, he wrote commentaries on the Upanishads, not the whole Vedic literature. It was Yaska who made the first attempt, serious attempt to interpret the Vedic mantras, Rigvedic mantras. It's called Nirukta. Only about less than 500 Riks or Veda mantras he took up for interpretation. Shankaracharya wrote commentaries on 10 of the most important Upanishads, which constitute the essence, the gist of Vedic philosophy. That's how they paid. So his contribution is mostly through his interpretation of the 10 great Upanishads.